Welcome to Talk Law Radio with attorney Todd Marquardt of the Marquardt Law Firm at marquardtlawfirm.com.
Talk Law Radio, I'm Todd Marquardt. In the beginning, God had one law: don't eat from the fruit of that tree. Then he gave Moses the 10 Commandments. And now we have municipal, state, and federal lawmakers that won't stop creating new laws that might impact you without you knowing it. So our mission is to help you discover your legal issue blind spots by listening to me talk about the law on the radio. Today, Pete Sepp is here from the National Taxpayers Union, helping us to understand the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, the reconciliation process. And in the last segment, he was telling us about his prediction about what the Senate is focused on and the changes that the Senate might make to the House version of the bill. We got through one of those possible changes. Let's get started on the other three.
Sure. So another change we might see the Senate make to the One Big Beautiful Bill has to do with business tax deductions. Now, in the current version, there is what's called full and immediate expensing. This means that if a business buys $10,000 worth of equipment, it can write off that $10,000 of cost in the year that the purchase is made against their tax liability. The problem with the old law was that you had to do something called depreciation. You could only write off part of that amount, upwards of about $1,250 a year. And on the rest of that money that you spent, you were taxed on it as if it were a profit. I mean, that's a ridiculous way of trying to respect business activity in this country. And so right now, the House's version of the One Big Beautiful Bill has that good full and immediate expensing, but only for 5 years. The Senate may try to make that provision 10 years or more to kind of add to the certainty businesses need to move forward with investment. It's no secret that when this tax break started to phase out in 2022, investment decreased in the business world. So we need to pay attention to that. And I hope the Senate acts.
That makes sense. I'm glad that you brought some of the business benefits into our discussion today because Marquardt Law Firm sponsors the show, and attorneys at Marquardt Law Firm focus on business law and helping business owners structure their business and analyze corporations and contracts and the like. So thank you for mentioning that. Let's continue on some of the predictable changes that the Senate might want to make.
Well, now we come to a potentially bad change, and that has to do with the Medicaid provisions. The House bill enacts some reforms to help reduce waste, fraud, and abuse in Medicaid, to keep states from unfairly running up Medicaid benefits to the point where the federal government has to match them at great expense. And it would tighten some of the eligibility rules around work requirements to receive Medicaid. Well, opponents of that predictably are saying, oh, this is going to be a terrible thing. People will be deprived of their health care. What's really going on here is saving the Medicaid system, which is running at such a terrible deficit, along with Medicare, frankly, the hospital insurance part. We've got to make sure that these programs are there for those who need it most. And the House bill slows the growth of Medicaid from about 4.5% of spending increase a year to 3%. That is hardly a huge sacrifice, but there are some members of the Senate in the Republican caucus who are saying that's too much. We can't do it. We want to rip those provisions out. Well, that's going to increase the deficit and worsen Medicaid's problems. We don't want to see the Senate make that change.
Okay. Well, now that you mentioned something that the House is probably not going to like. It made me think of your supporters of the National Taxpayers Union. Tell us a little bit of the makeup of the types of people that support your organization and how do they support it?
Sure. We welcome support from anyone who is concerned about the fiscal trajectory of any level of government, taxes, spending, debt, regulation. We work on those issues, and we want all taxpayers to feel comfortable joining us in our mission. Our primary constituents are individual taxpayers in the middle, upper middle class. Small business owners are disproportionately represented in our membership. A lot of that is because they're at the tip of the spear when it comes to IRS law enforcement. They don't necessarily have the resources that big businesses do to fight back when they're unfairly audited, and yet they have a little more income that the IRS could get its hands on than your typical working class family. And so we're especially sensitive to their concerns.
I think that there might be more people in San Antonio interested in what you have to say. So I'm glad that you're on the show today. Again, this is Pete Sepp. He's the president of National Taxpayers Union. We've been talking about the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, and he was telling us about some of the changes that the Senate might make to the House bill that's already been passed. And I think you had one more point, number 4.
Well, my fourth point would be whether the Senate is going to simplify and modify some of President Trump's tax priorities. We may recall that on the campaign trail, he said he wanted to get rid of the tax on tipped income, get rid of taxes on overtime, do something about taxes on the interest from auto loans, and do something about taxes on Social Security. Well, the One Big Beautiful Bill kind of takes a decent approach towards Social Security. They're simply increasing the standard deduction that you take before you declare your taxable income for seniors. So
Mhm.
that's a relatively simple way of doing it. But the others are quite complicated. They only last for a few years. The rules haven't been written on how you get these tax breaks. The Senate may decide, well, look, it's not fair to just confine this tax relief to people who happen to work overtime in a formal sense or get tips. Why not just allow all working people to get some form of tax relief, maybe increasing their standard deduction further or increasing the child tax credit further? Those would be easier ways of doing a similar thing.
Is there a signal from Ted Cruz, who introduced the no tax on tips? Is that a signal that they want something different?
It might be, and that's highly dependent on how long the Senate decides to mark up. That's what they call it, the House's version of the One Big Beautiful Bill. There have already been committee hearings on parts of the One Big Beautiful Bill in the Senate. The armed services portion, for example, was just marked up, didn't vary much at all with what the House passed. I suspect, though, when we get to the energy title, when we get to the tax title portion of the bill, we will see more changes. What matters is this looming self imposed deadline in the Senate. They want to have their version done and passed by July 4th. Well, that's less than a month away. And
Right.
like I said, Congress doesn't walk and chew gum at the same time. It's going to be a slow process. So they're going to have to watch their time and be careful about how many modifications they make.
Okay. Well, before we get on to the next point, I wanted to give you 3 minutes to talk about the National Taxpayers Union. What do you usually tell people are the most important parts of your organization?
The most important parts are we engage in shoe leather lobbying. In other words, lots of special interests have a lobbyist on Capitol Hill. Well, taxpayers need a lobbyist on Capitol Hill. That's the kind of thing we do. Anybody can send letters to Congress, can protest outside of Congress, can get on TV and complain about government, but there are very few organizations that actually have a dedicated lobbying team to try and advocate on legislation that matters to taxpayers. That's one of the things we do. I mentioned earlier that our research arm, NTU Foundation, does public interest litigation. Not many organizations do that on the tax issue. You can find some on the so-called center right that work on school choice or regulatory reform. We do our litigation on taxes and things that set precedents there. Another thing we do is research on very complex issues like IRS regulations or the way that the Congressional Budget Office assigns scores to legislation. Very minute stuff, but somebody's got to look into this and be the taxpayer advocate, the one in the room to say to the Congressional Budget Office and the IRS, here are the priorities you should be focusing on first. And we do that work as well. So when I became president 10 years ago, we had the decision of how do we compete with other organizations in our space? And my answer was we don't compete. We do what others are not doing in our movement, and we fulfill those needs.
Okay. Well, I think all of the description of what you said is going to be important to the people, not only for this one big, beautiful bill act, but all the other important advocacy that you do. So we'll keep talking about that throughout the show as well. In our next segment, I'd like to talk about the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and how this one big, beautiful bill might save it. But before we do that, we've got to take a break. Want to remind everybody that Talk Law Radio is on Facebook Live, on YouTube, and on talklawradio.com. If you have a regulation or a law that's a barrier to your business or to your life, go to talklawradio.com and post a question there. We'll be right back.
This has been Talk Law Radio with attorney Todd Marquardt, brought to you by the Marquardt Law Firm. You can learn more at marquardtlawfirm.com. And be sure to listen to the full Talk Law Radio show Saturday mornings at 11 on 9:30 a.m. The Answer.
Each week, attorney Todd Marquardt talks about the law. His mission with the Talk Law Radio show and podcast is to help you discover your legal issue blind spots. In the beginning, God had one law. Don't eat from the fruit of that tree. Then came the 10 Commandments. Now we have federal, state, and municipal lawmakers that won't stop creating new laws. Laws that might impact you without you knowing it. Listen to the show and drop a line on Facebook or email host@talklawradio.com and let the host know what you think of the show, the topics you want to hear, and whether you want to be a guest.